Forward march!
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a great honor to be with the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa.
The White House bells and whistles for a South African president looking for friendship and to strengthen business ties with America. It all started so well.
He is a man who is certainly in some circles really respected, other circles a little bit less respected.
Then the ambush.
We turn next to the fallout from President Trump's carefully staged Oval Office ambush of yet another visiting head of state. This time, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Cameras rolling, Trump confronted him with baseless claims of a genocide against white farmers in his home country.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
and
take
then when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
The world was stunned.
There is no such white genocide, and crime against white farmers represents a tiny fraction of the country's overall crime.
But there are questions over the veracity and motivation of the Trump administration in its pursuit of its discredited claims.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, Donald Trump versus South Africa. What is really going on? Who is whispering in his ear? And what does it have to do with a case before the International Court of Justice? Today I have an insight into both sides. I talked to Robert Patman, Professor of International Relations at Otago University.
I was appalled. It seems to me that America has humiliated itself. At least its president has humiliated America in the eyes of many people in the world. This is the second time that Mr. Trump has applied what might be called gotcha diplomacy, where he has ambushed someone in the Oval Office. It struck me as thoroughly unprofessional. If he had genuine concerns about white genocide, then he would have sent the documents in advance to the South African government to form the basis of a discussion which would usually happen behind closed doors on sensitive issues. There's no basis in the allegations that Mr. Trump has made. The whole thing was performative, and it may have won him some applause amongst MAGA supporters, Make America Great Again supporters in the United States. But it certainly hasn't won any international respect for the Trump administration.
I'll have a lot more from him in a moment, but first, the other side. Kathy is a white 10th generation South African now living in Auckland. She moved here with her husband 28 years ago. The decision clinched after a man was hijacked and killed in her work car park.
It was that one incident that became the absolute benchmark of why we left. And believe me, we didn't leave with a very happy family. You know, my dad, bless his soul, he said he would never leave a country he fought for. And he was in the Second World War. Yet, about 10 years later, Dad left South Africa and he came to New Zealand to be with us. My parents' turn for them was when they were out of the house. People came into the home and they found knives in the roof, and they knew it was no longer safe for them.
Today, she backs Trump.
I think that Donald Trump is a very astute gentleman, and I believe that what he has intended to do with his reaction and his approach to the situation in South Africa is to put a spotlight on it. I feel that media outlets like yourself would possibly not be talking about what is going on in South Africa had he not done that. So, let's give him some form of credit for actually bringing a spotlight to something that needs to be discussed.
What is going on in South Africa? Kathy, what can you tell us?
What we have is a current government not standing up to some of the oppositions in terms of some of the threats that they are making towards different race communities. I feel that in the same context, we have land-based laws starting to come into effect. And I do believe that a lot of the farmers and a lot of the Afrikaans community feel and I suppose English community as well, feel reasonably threatened by what is currently happening in the country. Land grabs, nothing new. Threatening of communities is nothing new. It's happened all the way through Africa. We saw it in Zimbabwe. And, it's certainly starting to take hold in some of those outer-lying communities of the South African landscape.
But do you know, Kathy, of any white farmers who have been killed and had their land taken from them?
I know of people who've had to run for their lives and leave their farms. I know of people who live in New Zealand who have had to return home because their families have been murdered. And so it is real and it is true, and I don't believe it's being reported on.
And it's what Trump has been increasingly fired up about in recent months. So it was perhaps a given that he would use his White House meeting with the South African president to launch his orchestrated ambush. It kicked off after this question to Trump from a South African journalist.
What will it take for you to be convinced that there's no white genocide in South Africa?
Well, I can answer that. It will take President Trump listening to the voices of South Africans.
What followed was the second Trump ambush of a visiting dignitary this year.
Turn the lights down and just put this on. It's right behind you.
Never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing.
He played a montage of rallies held by the South African Communist Opposition Party, chanting for the death of white farmers.
Shoot to kill. Come on, sir. Kill the poor, the farmer.
These are burial sites right here. Burial sites. Over 1,000 of white farmers. Each one of those white things you see is a cross. There's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers.
Actually, it turns out the crosses were placed along a section of a protest route by volunteers in 2020. It was over the reported murder of 2 farmers at their home. Regardless, Trump is sticking to his white genocide story.
Death, death, death. Horrible death.
You've got researchers and human rights groups who've come out discrediting Trump for what he's saying. What do you say to that?
People have not left that country for the decades that they have, the mass outflow of people from that country, because things are right in that country. And sadly, I fear that things are getting worse. And I pray that what Donald Trump is doing will bring a little bit more balance and perhaps a little bit more awareness to those leaders that the outside world is watching.
Because there was shock when he played those films when President Ramaphosa was in the White House. But you were pleased and you don't share that shock or disbelief.
I would rather reflect on it as bringing a spotlight on what is happening. And I think Donald Trump is smart enough not to share something that he doesn't believe to be true. We all know that the likes of Elon Musk, they have got relatives sitting in their country. So I think that the real stories filtering through to now the White House would come from reliable sources and with reliable backup.
This all comes after Donald Trump gave 59 white South Africans refugee status this year, the White House believing they have all been persecuted.
Today, nearly 60 white South Africans were admitted into the United States. It's part of President Donald Trump's resettlement program for white Afrikaners, largely descendants of Dutch and French colonial settlers in South Africa. Afrikaners also led the racist apartheid government there until it ended in 1994. Today, the White House alleges that a new South African law, which redistributes unused land to the state, is racist, and that the white minority is being persecuted by the black-led government. President Trump even halted all aid to South Africa back in February.
It was in January that President Ramaphosa signed a bill into law allowing land seizures by the state, but without compensation.
That's not right. That is so not right. And again, I think that's what is now being brought to light. If you've had land and that land has perhaps been acquired by yourself through legal means, or that land has been intergenerational land, which a lot of that farming land may be, who has the right to come and take it from you? It's so not right. You've got the likes of Malema who've always shouted that one bullet, one farmer. That needs to be stopped because that's hate speech. And that does not support peace in a country and uniting a country to deal with what they have to deal with. That creates division and it creates violence.
But Professor Robert Patman says while a law may have been passed, the land isn't been taken.
No such appropriation has taken place. And also, if an expropriation order is put out, that order can be challenged in court. So where is the evidence of all this land being seized? And the other thing here is that we have to take into account that much of South Africa's wealth is in the hands of about 7% of the white population. So although we're now 30 years on since the end of apartheid, there hasn't been any corresponding redistribution of wealth. And much of the South African population, the black population of South Africa, continues to struggle economically. One of the biggest issues that Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa made was that he didn't deny that South Africa suffers from violent crime. But he did point out that it's largely blacks that are the victim of such crime.
The most recent data available from the South African Police Service shows more than 19,000 people were murdered from April to December last year. 36 of these victims were linked to farms or small holdings. That's less than 0.2%. Of those, just 7 were farmers, and the data isn't broken down by race.
South Africa accepts that law and order is a continuing challenge, but totally rejects the allegation that white people are disproportionately targeted by crime.
Death, death, death. They're saying that kill the white farmer and take their land. Yes.
Elon Musk looked on silently. He's been amplifying the claims of genocide on his social media platform. But he didn't need to say anything here. The president's attack on South Africa was complete.
So what do you think prompted this? Why did he do it? Is there someone in his ear that's sort of firing him up on this?
Oh, yes. Part of Mr. Trump's support comes from a white nationalist base. There is a huge amount of nostalgia amongst MAGA supporters. They want to go back to a vision of how America was in the 1950s and before, when African Americans did not have full civil rights. And the other thing here is that, the number of very prominent white South Africans, such as Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, they all have quite a far-right agenda. So I think that there is a white nationalist component to Mr. Trump's decision to ambush Cyril Ramaphosa with false allegations, quite frankly. The second consideration here, which is important, is that South Africa's genocide case against Israel, which probably has more substance than Mr. Trump's own claims on South Africa, implicates the United States and has enraged the administration. So, in short, the decision by the South African government to pursue a genocide case at the International Court of Justice against Israel's response to the Hamas terrorist attack of the 7th of October has also infuriated the Trump administration. And so, in a sense, I suppose, in the eyes of his supporters, Mr. Trump is holding Cyril Ramaphosa's government to account by attempting to belittle him and humiliate him.
How do you think he handled it, the South African president and his delegation, after this ambush?
What was striking was how composed he was under fire. And the other thing was, I think he actually gave some pretty devastating rebuttals to Mr. Trump. They didn't register. Mr. Trump just ploughed on. But he was accompanied by two international white South African golfers, Ernie Els and Retief Goosen, as well as a well-known South African billionaire. And he made the point that if white genocide had really occurred, would he be able to include such people in his delegation? And the other thing is, all these three individuals joined in, along with their president, Ramaphosa, in vehemently denying what the president was saying. So I think overall, Ramaphosa's decision to play it cool and not get involved in an indignant confrontation in the way that President Zelensky did.
We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
But I think on balance, Ramaphosa is not harmed by these claims. I don't think it's going to harm Mr. Ramaphosa domestically. It's a further step in the erosion of international respect for American leadership. Mr. Trump shouldn't take at face value flimsy allegations about white genocide. And I don't think it's done the Trump administration's international reputation much good. Now, I don't think Mr. Trump worries about that too much. I think he's worried about appearing to be a so-called strong man in the eyes of his base of support in the United States.
The White House ambush has been a pattern of behaviour this year. Think the Irish Prime Minister.
You took our pharmaceutical companies and other companies, but, through taxation.
And America's frenemy, Canada.
This is a very friendly conversation, but we want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada.
So will this deter other world leaders from meeting with the president?
The problem is that every time we have one of these appalling scenes in the White House, it further erodes the view that Mr. Trump should be treated with respect and that his administration, does deal with facts. I kept reflecting, having watched the confrontation between Mr. Trump and Ramaphosa, that Zelensky had described Mr. Trump as living in a disinformation bubble. And when you watch that sort of encounter and the absolute conviction that Mr. Trump exudes that he knows what is right when he doesn't do anything, I think, to boost what has been a major asset of the United States, which has been what political scientists call soft power, the ability to persuade others. And I think America, it takes a long time to build a reputation and what might be called soft power. But I think in an interconnected world, you can lose it quite rapidly. And I think this administration is in the process of losing some diplomatic credibility. I'm still at a loss to wonder why this was so carefully choreographed and so carefully planned. What did the administration think they would get out of this other than perhaps excite their MAGA loyalists? You raised the question of will other liberal democracies be impressed by such claims? On balance, I don't think so, given the circumstances and the lack of authoritative factual evidence to back up the claims.
Black South Africans have been quick to defend their country and debunk the white genocide claims. Here's a selection of outspoken journalists and social media activists who are on the ground in South Africa.
Where are the massacres
against white people, where school children are shot in the back, where shoes are left in the road because people are trying to get out of there. Where has that happened? It's beyond insulting this myth of a white genocide. He's extremely xenophobic against immigrants entering the United States, but wants to elevate the status of settler colonialists in South Africa, who own the majority of the economy, who own 72% of the arable land, and push this idea that they are the victims of racism. If they're the victims of racism, then the ANC government's not very good at racism. But isn't racism meant to dispossess you of your land? Isn't racism meant to push you into the ghettos? Isn't racism meant to make sure that you're overrepresented in the prison system? Isn't racism meant to mean that you live in poverty? So based on all of those factors, the ANC are the worst racist in history.
White South Africans represent about 62% of management positions in South Africa, despite them only making about less than 8% of the overall working population. These guys own about 60% of companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. White families earn and spend about 5 times more than an average black family. So in which world are these such a group discriminated?
Yeah, I think I maybe start by saying for the privileged, equality usually sounds like oppression. So for them, they've had decades upon decades of the system actually favoring them against the actual native people on the land.
I mean, black people have been hoping for their land to be given back to them since the end of the apartheid. They've been debating this for decades. So many black people are upset. So finally, they passed a land expropriation law in January of this year that aims to address the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And by the way, the law that they passed in January, the one that Trump is upset about, does not say that land will be seized arbitrarily. No, they are actually targeting lands that are not being used. And they are also saying that there will be an agreement with the owner. Any land expropriations would still have to go through South Africa's independent courts.
Well, there is no persecution. The country is doing fairly well. There is a lot of unemployment. There's actually more unemployment among people of color than among white people. The Afrikaner people specifically are among the most successful people in the country. There are Afrikaner billionaires. There's Afrikaner CEOs of very large companies. They still own most of the land. So they're actually doing quite well. And this is a story that we don't really hear.
Professor Robert Patman says Trump will always be heard and won't back down over South Africa.
Mr. Trump has been economical with the truth for a long time, and it hasn't prevented him from being politically successful. So I don't think he's going to stop what he sees as working for him. From his point of view, I think he has been railing on about South Africa for a number of months. And I think that he probably would see the job as done. Yes, I think he would see that he said to his supporters, he brought the South African president to the White House and gave him a dressing down and let him know who's boss. I think this is the image that he likes to convey to his supporters who seem to lap it all up. That's the performative image of Mr. Trump dressing down someone in the White House like a schoolmaster dressing down a naughty child. But the reality is that America has humiliated itself, not humiliated the South African visitor.
As for Kathy, she has spoken to people in her home country and they stand by their truth. But it's tough.
There's some that have got their heads in the sand. There are some that are pleased that there has been a spotlight placed on all of this. And there are others that are packing their bags as we speak to try and go wherever.
Would you ever go back? Ever move back? Would there be anything that could get you back there or just never?
That's such a hard question. Yes, this is my home and this is where my children were born. They're New Zealanders, but I still identify as being South African. Would I go back? I can't go back because it's not safe for me to go back. However, I can't tell you that I don't miss that country every single day.
That's all for today. The Detail is a Newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Kathy and Professor Robert Patman. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Rangi Powick. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.